At 73, I realized that my son interpreted my every silence as approval. He began making decisions about my house, my bank account, my life, as if I were no longer present. And I was there, seeing everything. What he didn't know was that I always knew exactly what was going on, from day one, and that my silence had a very specific reason. My name is Robert. I am 73 years old and have lived in the same house for 42 years. I built this life brick by brick. I worked as a civil engineer until I retired at 65. I raised my son alone after my wife Linda died when he was only 7. It was hard, but I never complained. I did what needed to be done. My son David grew up well. He graduated in business administration, married a woman named Jessica, and had 2 children. We were always close. He would come to dinner with me every Sunday. He would call during the week. I thought we had a solid relationship based on mutual respect. I was wrong. It all started about 1.5 years ago. Small things. David showed up one day with a new keychain in his hand. He said he'd made a copy of my house key. For emergencies, he said it was more practical, that if I needed help, he could come in without me worrying. I thought it was strange. I never asked for that, but I didn't say anything. I thought it was genuine concern. A few weeks later, he started showing up unannounced. He'd come in, check the refrigerator, look through the cupboards. He'd say he was checking if I was eating right, if I was taking care of my health. He spoke in that tone you use with a child, as if I didn't know how to take care of myself anymore. I was 72 years old, not 7, but I remained silent, because part of me wanted to believe that it was love, that it was care, that my son was simply being attentive. But deep down, even then, I felt that something was out of place. So, one Sunday, David brought Jessica over, and she started talking about a retirement home, about how nice it would be for me to have company, about how maintaining my house was becoming a burden for me. I looked at her, then at David. He avoided my gaze. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, silently agreeing with everything she said. And it was at that moment that I realized. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the house. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If this story resonates with you, if you've been through something similar or know someone who has, please help me out. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment saying where you're hearing this story from. Because I know I'm not alone in this, and neither are you. We understand each other, you and I, and that's why I'm here sharing this with you. I realized it early on. This is important for you to understand. It wasn't a surprise, it wasn't a shock. I saw the signs from the beginning. But I chose not to react. Not because I was weak, not because I didn't know what was happening, but because I wanted to be sure, and because, frankly, a part of me still hoped I was wrong. After that conversation about the nursing home, things started to move faster. David began coming more often, always with some excuse, that he needed to check the plumbing, that he had heard a strange noise, that he wanted to see if the roof was okay. I let him. I observed. I mentally noted every movement. One day he brought a real estate agent. He said he was a friend, that he was just stopping by to say hi. But I saw the way the man looked at the house, how he measured the rooms with his eyes, how he asked questions about the foundation, about renovations, about the land. I didn't say anything, I just offered coffee. I was polite. And when they left, I knew exactly what had happened. David was assessing how much the house was worth. A few weeks later, he returned with papers. He said they were documents about my health insurance plan, that he needed my signature to update my registration. I took the papers. I read them carefully. They weren't health insurance documents. It was a power of attorney, giving him full access to my bank account and the authority to make financial decisions on my behalf. I looked at him. He smiled. That smile I'd known since childhood. The same smile he had when he broke something and tried to hide it. I didn't sign. I said I needed to talk to my lawyer first. He tensed up. He said it wasn't necessary, that it was just a formality. That trust between father and son was more important than a piece of paper. I remained silent. I put the documents away, and I said I would think about it. David left in a rage that day. He slammed the car door harder than usual, and I sat there in the living room, staring at those papers, thinking about how long he'd planned this, how long he'd pretended to care. But still, I didn't say anything, because I needed to see how far he would go. You need to understand one thing about me. I'm not confrontational. I never have been. When Linda died, I could have yelled at God. I could have broken things. But I didn't. I accepted it. I reorganized my life. I raised my son. I kept working. I maintained my dignity. I've always believed that silence is a form of strength, that you don't need to constantly explain yourself to prove your worth. But David interpreted my silence differently. He thought I was naive, that I didn't understand things, that he could do whatever he wanted because I was too old to react, and it was this arrogance of his that began to show me who he really was. After the power of attorney incident, he changed his strategy. He stopped trying to be subtle. He started treating me as if I was senile. He spoke to me slowly, using simple words. He repeated things 3 or 4 times, as if I hadn't understood, as if I had forgotten what he had just said. I let it go. I pretended not to notice, but every word was a revelation. Every gesture showed me how much he underestimated me, and I began to understand that this wasn't new. He probably always saw me that way, as someone he could manipulate, someone who wouldn't react. One day he showed up with Jessica and their 2 grandchildren, a rare occurrence. The children almost never came to see me. They stayed for about an hour, maybe. David and Jessica talked to each other most of the time, about a trip they wanted to take, about a new house they were thinking of buying, about how expensive things were. Before leaving, David hugged me, and he whispered in my ear, "Dad, we need to have a serious talk about your future. You can't keep living alone here. It's not safe." I looked at him. I held his gaze for a few seconds, and I simply said, "Okay, son. We'll talk later." He smiled, relieved. He thought he had convinced me. He thought I was agreeing. But what I was doing was buying time, because I already knew what he wanted, and I needed concrete proof before making any decision. They thought I didn't understand, but I always understood. In the following weeks, David began acting as if he already had my permission for everything. He brought people in to assess the house. He said they were inspectors, checking the structure, but I knew they were real estate agents. He started going through my things. He rearranged my garage. He took away tools, saying I didn't use them anymore. He took books, records, objects that had sentimental value. I didn't say anything. I just observed what he was carrying, and I made a mental note of it. One day, he showed up with a tablet. He said he had set everything up for me, that now I could see pictures of my grandchildren, read the news, watch videos. He spoke as if he were giving me an incredible gift, as if I were a child receiving a new toy. I accepted the tablet. I thanked him. And when he left, I explored every setting, every app, and that's when I saw it. He had installed a remote monitoring program. He could see everything I did, every website I visited, every email I sent. He was watching me. At that moment, many things became clear. How often he would show up right after I'd spoken to someone on the phone. The specific questions about things I'd only mentioned in emails. He was monitoring my life and thinking I didn't notice. I continued using the tablet normally, but I became more careful about what I accessed on it. I started using my old computer for important things, and I kept the tablet visible, active, full of irrelevant searches. I let it think it was in control. Because I was starting to understand the game, and the best way to win a game is to let your opponent think they're winning. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to justify my decisions. When David asked about my routine, I gave vague answers. When he suggested changes, I just nodded, without committing to anything, and the more I did that, the more confident he became. It was like watching someone dig their own grave, slowly, with determination, without realizing what they were doing. Have you ever had that feeling of being invisible, of being in a room full of people, but no one really seeing you? That's how I started to feel. David and Jessica talked about me as if I wasn't there. They discussed my future as if I were property to be managed, a problem to be solved. One day they came to dinner. Jessica brought brochures about retirement homes. She put everything on the table, next to my plate, and she started talking about the advantages, about how I would have company, about how it would be safe, about how I wouldn't have to worry about anything. David agreed with everything. He said it was the best thing for me, that they had done a lot of research, that they wanted what was best for me. I ate in silence. I looked at the brochures. All the houses were expensive, very expensive, and I knew that my house, if sold, would easily cover the cost, and there would be a considerable amount left over, which I'm sure David and Jessica were already planning how to use. When they finished speaking, I simply said, "I'll think about it." Jessica was frustrated. She said I needed to be more practical, that I couldn't postpone important decisions, that at my age I should trust those who care about me. I looked at her, then at David, and I said very calmly, "I trust you, but this is my life, and I'm going to think about it." David tensed up, but he didn't insist. They left soon after, and I stood there alone looking at those brochures, thinking about how I got to that point, thinking about when my son had stopped being my son and had become just someone interested in what I possessed. But I still wasn't ready to act, because I needed more information. I needed to understand exactly what he was planning, and for that, I needed to remain silent. I needed to continue being underestimated, because the more he underestimated me, the more he revealed his true intentions. In the following weeks, David began to act with a confidence bordering on arrogance. He stopped asking permission for anything. He simply announced his decisions. "Dad, I've scheduled a doctor's appointment for you on Tuesday. Dad, I've hired someone to mow the lawn. Dad, I'll need your signature on some documents next week." I just nodded. I didn't argue. I didn't question. And that made him even more comfortable, even more confident. One day he showed up with a man in a suit. He introduced himself as the family lawyer. He said they were organizing my will, that it was important to have everything documented, that it was for my own good. I said that I already had a will, that I had made it years ago with my own lawyer. David laughed. He said that was outdated, that the laws had changed, that it was better to redo it with someone specialized. The man in the suit agreed. He said it was a matter of legal certainty. I pretended to consider it. I said I needed to think. David became visibly irritated, but he controlled himself. He said it was fine that I could think about it, but that I shouldn't take too long. When they left, I called my real lawyer, Charles. We'd known each other for over 30 years. I told him everything, every detail, every move. He listened in silence, and when I finished, he simply said, "Robert, you need to protect yourself. Now." And that's what I did. Charles prepared a series of documents. He updated my will. He ensured that my house was legally protected, that no one could make decisions about my assets without my explicit and verified approval, that even if I became incapacitated, there would be safeguards. I signed everything, and I kept the copies in a safe place, far from home, where David would never find them. But I didn't tell him anything. I continued acting as if I were confused, as if I were slowly giving in, as if it were just a matter of time. David was starting to get impatient. I could tell by the way he spoke, by the more frequent visits, by his insistence on getting things resolved quickly. He and Jessica must have had some deadline, some plan that depended on me leaving the house soon. One day he brought a sales contract. He said he had found a buyer interested in the house, that the price was good, that it was an opportunity we couldn't miss, that after the sale I would go to one of the retirement homes Jessica had shown me, and that everything would be settled. I picked up the contract. I read it carefully. The amount was absurdly low, less than half of what the house was actually worth, and the buyer was a company I'd never heard of. I looked it up on the phone. It was a recently registered LLC, no history, no trace. You didn't need to be a genius to figure it out. David had created a shell company. He was going to buy my house for a ridiculously low price, and then resell it for its real value, pocketing the difference. I looked at him. He was nervous, anxious for my answer, expecting me to sign without question, like a confused old man who no longer understood anything. I said, "I need to show this to my lawyer first." David exploded. He yelled that I didn't trust him, that he was my son, that he was trying to help me, that I was being stubborn and difficult. Jessica chimed in, saying that I was holding everything back, that they were trying to protect me, that at my age I needed to accept help. I didn't yell back. I didn't get upset. I just repeated calmly, "I'll show it to my lawyer." David stormed out. He slammed the door. He left the contract on the table, and I stood there alone, staring at that piece of paper, at his signature, at the fake company, at the complete fraud my own son was trying to commit against me. And it was at that moment that I understood there was no more doubt. There was no more chance of being wrong. David wasn't just being greedy. He was willing to steal from me, to deceive me, to treat me like an obstacle that needed to be removed. I showed the contract to Charles. He was horrified. He said it was fraud, that it was financial abuse of an elderly person, that David could be criminally prosecuted if I wanted, but I didn't want to prosecute my son. I didn't want to destroy him. I just wanted him to stop. Charles suggested I confront him, that I show him I knew everything, that I make it clear I wouldn't be manipulated. But I said no, because I knew David. If I confronted him now, he would temporarily back down. He would feign remorse. And then he would come back with a different strategy, more subtle, more dangerous. I wanted him to continue feeling safe. I wanted him to make a mistake big enough that he couldn't undo it. A mistake that would have consequences, not because I wanted revenge, but because it was the only way for him to learn. It was the only way for this to truly stop. So I did the following. I told David that I had thought about the contract, that I was considering signing it, but that I needed time, that at my age big decisions take time. He was relieved. He thought he had won, that it was just a matter of patience, and while he waited, I watched. I observed every movement, every visit, every conversation, and I wrote everything down. Dates, times, witnesses, documents. I was building a complete record, not to use against him immediately, but to have it on hand, just in case. David started bringing Jessica over more often. The two of them talked openly about selling the house, about their plans for the money, about a trip they were going to take after everything was settled. They talked as if I wasn't there, as if I were a piece of furniture, something they had to move around before rearranging the living room. And I remained silent, because the silence was working. It was revealing everything. Do you know what's interesting about people who underestimate others? They make mistakes because of overconfidence. They stop hiding. They stop pretending, because they think they don't need to anymore. David started doing increasingly daring things. He brought a truck one afternoon and began removing furniture from the house. He said he was organizing things, taking them to a storage facility to facilitate an eventual move. I let him. I observed which furniture he chose, the most valuable pieces, antiques that had belonged to Linda, pieces worth thousands of dollars. He thought I didn't know the value of those things, but I did. Every piece, every story, every penny. A few weeks later, I saw some of those pieces of furniture for sale online, on auction sites, advertised by anonymous profiles, but I knew it was him. I recognized the pieces. The photos were taken in his warehouse. I had been there once, years ago. I took screenshots. I saved everything. I sent it to Charles. He said it was theft, that I could report it. But again, I said no, not yet, because David was sinking. And I wanted him to hit rock bottom, not out of cruelty, but because only there would he understand the gravity of what he was doing. One day he showed up with new papers. He said they were updates to my health insurance plan, that I needed to sign them to keep the coverage. I took them, I read them. They weren't health documents. It was another kind of power of attorney. This time, more comprehensive. It gave him total control over everything. Health, finances, property, legal decisions. If I signed that, I would become legally incapable of making my own decisions. I looked at him. He avoided my gaze. And in that moment, I saw something in his face. It wasn't love. It wasn't concern. It was pure greed, mixed with something worse. Resentment. As if he were angry that I was still alive, that I was still an obstacle. And that's when I decided, that was enough. You need to understand. Up until that moment, part of me still wanted to believe there was some genuine love, that maybe he was confused, that maybe Jessica was influencing him. But when I looked at those papers, at that blatant attempt to render me legally incompetent, I understood there was nothing left to salvage. I told David I needed to go to the bathroom. I grabbed the papers and went to my room. I called Charles. I told him about the documents. He told me not to sign anything, to leave the house immediately, to go to his office. I went back to the room. I told David I wasn't feeling well, that I was going to rest, that we would talk later. He got impatient, but he left, and as soon as he was gone, I packed a small bag. I took important documents, and I went to Charles's house. I spent a few days there, organizing everything, reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, every proof of what David had done. And then Charles contacted a court officer. He presented everything: the fraudulent contract, the stolen furniture, the forged documents, the attempts to obtain power of attorney fraudulently. The officer launched an investigation. He contacted David. He asked for explanations. And that's when everything started to fall apart for him. David called desperate. He said there had been a misunderstanding, that he was just trying to help, that I had misinterpreted everything. I didn't answer. I let him talk to Charles, and Charles was very clear. He said that David had committed multiple crimes, that there was documented evidence, that if he continued he would face serious legal consequences. Jessica called too, crying, saying I was destroying the family, that they only wanted what was best for me, that I was being manipulated by lawyers. I hung up, because there was nothing left to talk about. There were no more excuses that would work. They had made their choices, and now they were facing the consequences. The consequences came quickly. The investigation revealed that David had used my name to open lines of credit, small amounts at first, but they were growing. He was incurring debt in my name, planning, I presume, to declare that I had become senile and that the debts were invalid. Meanwhile, he was pocketing the money. When the bank discovered the fraud, they contacted the authorities. David was called to testify, and he discovered he couldn't lie to get away with it, because there were records, signatures, security cameras showing him withdrawing money, using cards in my name. Charles obtained a temporary restraining order, prohibiting David from approaching me or my home, prohibiting any attempt at direct contact, and most importantly, freezing any financial transactions related to my assets. All the furniture he had taken was tracked. Some of it had already been sold. The money was recovered and returned to my account. The remaining furniture was seized and returned to my home. The shell company he had created to buy my house was investigated, and they discovered it wasn't just for my property. He'd done this before, with other elderly people. Small scams, nothing big enough to attract attention. Until now. The authorities expanded the investigation. Other cases surfaced, other victims, and suddenly, David wasn't just facing problems with me. He was facing multiple criminal charges. Jessica filed for divorce. She said she knew nothing about it. That she had been deceived too. I don't know if I believe that. But it doesn't matter anymore. She took her grandchildren and moved to another state. She cut off all contact with David. And David, he lost everything. His job, his family, his reputation. He's facing criminal charges, probable prison, all because he thought I was too weak to react, too old to understand, too easy to manipulate. You might be thinking that I feel bad about this, that a father shouldn't want to see his son suffer. And you'd be right. A part of me is broken, because I raised that man, I dedicated my life to him, and somehow he became someone capable of doing this to me. But another part of me knows this was necessary. Because if I had given in, if I had signed those papers, if I had let him take me from my home, what would have happened? He would have continued. He would have done worse. And maybe he would have destroyed other people too. Silence is not always weakness. Sometimes, silence is patience. It is observation. It is the strength to wait for the right moment. I could have confronted David at the first sign. I could have yelled. I could have cut ties immediately. But what would that have solved? He would have denied everything. It would have made me look paranoid. It would have isolated me even more. Instead, I waited. I observed. I gathered evidence. And when I acted with everything I had, with documents, with proof, with witnesses, with the force of truth and the law. And now David is facing the exact consequences of his own choices, not because I destroyed him, but because he destroyed himself. I simply didn't prevent it from happening. I returned to my house. It's empty without the furniture he sold, but little by little I'm recovering the pieces, some through auctions, others through investigation. And those I can't recover, I'm learning to live without. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's not loneliness, it's peace, because now there's no one trying to take me away from here. There's no one planning to manipulate me. There's no one pretending to love me while plotting theft. It's just me, my house, my books, my memories of Linda, and for the first time in a long time, I feel safe. The neighbors ask about David. I just say that we're distant at the moment. They don't need to know the details. They don't need to know about the shame, the betrayal, how much it hurts to realize that your own son only saw you as a means to an end. Sometimes I wonder where I went wrong. Was it something I did, something I failed to do? But Charles reminds me that I can't carry this guilt, that I did the best I could, that David made his own choices, and that those choices have consequences. His trial is scheduled for a few months from now. His lawyers say he'll probably accept a plea deal. He'll plead guilty in exchange for a lighter sentence. He'll spend a few years in prison. He'll have a criminal record for the rest of his life, and me, I'll probably be there in court. Not to testify against him. That won't be necessary. The evidence speaks for itself. But maybe to see him, to look into his eyes one more time, and understand how we got here. Part of me still loves that 7-year-old boy who cried in my lap when Linda died. That boy I held by the hand as we walked to school. That boy who ran to hug me when I got home from work. But that boy no longer exists, and perhaps he never existed in the way I thought he did. Maybe I only saw what I wanted to see. Maybe I ignored the signs too soon, the small selfish acts, the small lies, the small acts of disrespect. Or maybe he changed, maybe greed, envy, resentment for growing up without a mother, for having a father who worked too much, for not having had the life he thought he deserved. Maybe all of that poisoned who he was. I don't know, and maybe I never will. But I do know this. I did what was right. Not easy, but right. In these last few months, I've learned a lot about myself. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought, that my silence was never weakness, that patience is not passivity, and that dignity doesn't mean accepting abuse. I also learned that not every relationship can be saved, that sometimes no matter how much you love someone, you need to let them go. You need to let them face the consequences of their actions, because that's the only way they can learn. The only way they can perhaps one day become better people. I don't know if David will learn anything from this. I don't know if he'll leave prison repentant or just more bitter. I don't know if he'll ever look for me, offer a genuine apology, or try to rebuild some kind of relationship. Honestly, I don't know if I want to, because trust, once broken like that, is almost impossible to rebuild. And I'm past the age of living in constant vigilance, wondering if the people around me have ulterior motives. But if he wants to try, I'll listen. Not because I'm weak, not because I forgave easily, but because I choose not to carry hatred. Hatred is heavy, and I've already carried too much weight in my life. Now my days are simple. I read, I tend the garden, I talk to Charles about politics, about books, about life. I go for walks in the morning. I watch old movies at night. Small things, but they're mine. Nobody's trying to take that away from me. And that, you understand, is freedom. It's not the freedom to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to be who you are, without fear, without manipulation, without having to explain yourself or defend yourself all the time. It's the freedom that comes from knowing you faced one of the hardest things anyone can face, the betrayal of someone you love, and you survived. You maintained your dignity. You didn't become bitter. You didn't become cruel. You just moved on. Today, sitting here in my living room, looking out the window at the garden Linda planted so many years ago, I think about everything that happened, And I realized that I don't regret my silence. I don't regret waiting. I don't regret observing. Because it was this silence that gave me clarity. It was this patience that gave me evidence. It was this dignity that allowed me to act in the right way when the time came. Not every warning is a favor. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is to let them face the consequences of their own choices. Because it's only through those consequences that people truly learn. David interpreted my silence as weakness, and that mistake cost him everything. But it wasn't my silence that destroyed him. It was his own actions. I just didn't stop him. And that, I think, is the greatest lesson. You don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need revenge to achieve justice. You don't need to destroy someone to protect yourself. You just need patience, clarity, and to act at the right time. Those who realize it early don't need to rush, because when you understand the game, you can play it better. You can wait for the right time. And when that time comes, you act with precision, with documentation, with witnesses, with the force of truth on your side. I am 73 years old now. I probably won't live forever, but I will live the rest of my days in my home, with my dignity intact, with my peace preserved, and with the certainty that I did what was right, and that in the end is all that matters. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. I know it wasn't an easy story, but I hope it made sense to you. If you know someone who is going through something similar, someone who is being underestimated, manipulated, or treated as if they don't matter, share this story with that person. Sometimes we just need to know that we're not alone. If you liked the way I told this story, give the video a like. If you want to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel and stick around, because we understand each other, you and I. And amidst so much fast-paced, noisy, and superficial stuff out there, it's good to have a place where we can talk slowly, calmly, about things that really matter. Thank you. And until next time.